Hello, Midnight TCG members. This is Midnight Fox, and we're coming to you with this week's Competitive Edge podcast. This week we have Genzaki recording. We have King Daipai with us this week.
Hey.
We have Genzo.
Hey.
And a very rare occasion here lately, we have Kyo.
Eh?
That's a tribute to Nomad. Anyways, this week we're going to be discussing a very real element of the game that for a long time has not really been brought up as much as the gentleman who was recently banned from dueling. We're going to be talking about cheating this week in the game. So, without further ado, there's a few aspects I think we're going to cover of it. And, towards the end, just go over cheating in general. But one of the first things Genzo definitely wanted to cover was stacking your deck and the misconceptions about it. I'm going to say that as far as stacking decks, when I first started, the one thing I saw a lot was people monster spell, monster trap, monsters. I seen people doing that, laying them out, and you had to say something to them. The actual way I was told to do it is you put everything face down and fan it out in 6 or 7 stacks and just and that's the way I do it. But there are some players who have gotten pretty crafty at the game and do know how to set up their decks properly, but it is a very hard feat, which this is where I'm going to let Genzo take over because I'm sure he has a nice long rant about it.
Well, it's not so much about the idea of stacking, more than I guess it would be about just the general misconception, like for players to actually use that. And I want to say every time that I hear someone say, "Oh, I was stacked," or "that guy stacked me," that they're just kidding. Like they're just, blowing smoke. You know what I mean? Because, and I guess I'll start the discussion with what should be the end of it. I guess the point that should be made at the end, which is, you have the last interaction with your opponent's deck, whether it be at the beginning of the game where you shuffle up and you offer your deck to your opponent for him to split, or after he goes in for a card's effect like Reinforcement of the Army. When he searches out his warrior, he shuffles the deck and then he presents it to you. Say you shuffle, and then he's allowed to split one more time, but if he does, you again have the final touch. You get to split the deck again. So, to be stacked is to say, I saw my opponent shuffle, maybe he did it in a surreptitious, sly, underhanded kind of way, and I still did nothing about it. So again, it's your fault. I just, me and Genzaki were talking about before the podcast, there are ways that you can actually, with a 40-card deck, pile shuffle to set up a hand. But it's so dependent on your opponent. Your opponent's generally, he can only split it once, and he has to split it in the general right area. But as soon as they shuffle, if you're playing an opponent who picks up your deck and actually shuffles it a few times, that strategy's out the window, right? It just blows my mind that stacking is still such a used buzzword. And it's just like I mentioned before the podcast, there's a lot of buzzwords in Yu-Gi-Oh!, whether it be staple or broken or top deck. I think it's pretty funny to hear people say, I just top decked a card when they have 5 cards in their hand and 2 on the field. That's not top decking. Top decking means when you draw a card from the top of your deck, it's the only card you have in play. But I just think that's what stacking is. It's just people have heard a word. It's a buzzword. It's used a lot. It has a significant meaning to the game if you believe it. And so people just, it's another way that people can get out of losing and being aware that they lost because they lost. Stacking is just another one of those kind of voodoo reasons of why it was beyond them. They didn't lose by anything they did or didn't do. It was because their opponent, so that's what I wanted to mention about the stacking. I think it's really irrelevant, just because you have the last, shuffle or split on your opponent's deck. So like, I'm sure there are some things that people can do. Like, I don't like to see my opponent shuffling his deck in an angle. I prefer my opponent, if they watch me, they'll see exactly what I wish them to do, which is to shuffle their deck parallel to the table, which means the bottom of the deck is facing the table as much as possible. Because that prevents anybody from telling you, oh, you're looking at the bottom card of your deck. Again, even if they did that, you have the final split. But yeah, that's the little rant, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. But yeah, I would appreciate it if players used a little more common sense in regards to that, and just think of how difficult it is. Like, actually look it up on YouTube or something, how to stack a deck, and you will be amazed at how difficult it is, because the actual difference in a poker deck, which is very easy to stack, very easy to force cards using sleight of hand, the poker deck is so much different than the Yu-Gi-Oh deck. You can use spins as ways to hide yourself forcing a card to a certain position, whether it be the top of the deck. Well, if you use a spin maneuver, which is called a flourish, if you use that kind of flourish, then it puts half of your deck facing one way and the other half facing the other way, and that's pretty obvious to a player who looks at your deck that you did something wrong there. So yeah, I just want to get that little misconception out. Just use a little more common sense, And if your opponent is doing something shifty, if they're looking at their deck in a certain way, if they're paying attention to how they shuffle way too much for your liking, call a judge. If you're that worried about it. So that's it. I just don't think stacking is as prevalent or as successful as people would have it.
In the early days of the game, before you got your more experienced players, it might have been more prevalent then. But yeah, as players have grown in experience, I would say it's not a good tactic. And Konami has come down real hard on players as far as cheating. So some people who do take the game very seriously, they don't want to take that chance. So maybe that's one good thing Konami has done. Kyo, King Dai Pai, you guys got thoughts on stacking the deck?
There are ways to actually stack the deck by power shuffling, but like Ginjo said, if your opponent being careful about it and then shuffling after being power shuffle and stuff, it's kind of messed up the way that they do it. So yeah, it's pretty much cover.
What about you, King Dai Pai?
Ginzo pretty much said it all, but like he said, if they successfully stacked a deck against you, you almost deserve to lose.
So, I mean, basically the big thing to say on stacking cards is you can't really blame it on stacking cards. In the end, it comes down to you.
I do want to say this, like just because of the way Kiyu made his comment, I don't want to make it come off like it's impossible, because like I told Genzaki before the podcast, I can create a video and show you how to pile shuffle and put a particular card or set of cards within 10 cards, a 10-card pile in your deck. I can show you how to do it, but the reason why I think stacking is so overblown in the game is because even after doing that, I can then show you, by never moving the camera from my hands, I'll reveal the 10 cards and show you where they're at in the deck, and then to show you, as the opposing player, if you grab the deck and shuffle it, how that ruins that. You can stack a deck. It is very tedious in Yu-Gi-Oh, we'll say, and any kind of TCG game, especially with sleeves, because control and palming and sleight of hand becomes much more difficult because the deck is taller than a poker deck. It's not as thin, so it's possible to do, but it does come down to the opponent allowing it. Been mentioned in the past. Sure, I'm sure back in the day people weren't so keen on splitting decks because it was just like, oh, hey, we're playing whatever. I tap. That's why I never tap. And even if my opponent says I'll tap, I'll split the deck again. Like, I don't want anybody coming back to me saying, oh, because I didn't split your deck and you stacked me, that's why I lost.
Well, and then you mentioned the sleeves. You add that element to it, it is a lot harder to stack. And most players, if they're going to be willing to stack, they're not going to play their cards outside of a sleeve. because that's an investment. So, yeah, I mean, it is pretty hard to do. What was it the gentleman over in Europe was actually, he was disqualified, kicked out of dueling for?
Okay, so like I don't want to give any misinformation whatsoever because I don't think it's been what do you say,
Confirm.
an official statement made, or I'm not even sure if he's on the ban list, the actual suspended list, player list for Konami. Excuse me, but the hearsay or the word about is Simon He, who's a player from Europe. I want to say he was 11-0 or 12-0 at some point in the tournament, and then he was accused of cheating and was disqualified from the tournament, and his team, the United Gosu's team, dropped him from their roster, which would have you believe that, you know, there's something a little legit to the claims being made. But yeah, that's what it was. And again, like, I don't know for sure. I'm just, you know, hearing what I've heard from other places, which is that he was using his fingernails to mark cards. Whether that's what happened, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that's kind of like, you know, the rumor mill. And there is a rumor mill in Yu-Gi-Oh! And this podcast isn't about him in specific. It's just about what happened. And
Right.
It's a good talking point because you always need to be aware of cheaters. So.
Well, that's why I just kind of wanted to mention, you know, what the aspect of it was. Personally, I don't know. Would you really want to mark your cards? Like I said, it's an investment. For me personally, I wouldn't want to ruin my investment by marking them, but who knows? It's like you said, it's all a rumor mill.
Well, the marking wasn't necessarily of the cards per se; it was the sleeves. So when the opponent's hand was, you know, spread out while he was looking and deciding what his play would be, the player who marked the sleeves would be able to tell if he had a power card or a really relevant card for the matchup. You know, and I guess like one of the ways that was mentioned that he could do this is like in game 1 when he says, "Hey, can I see your graveyard?" And he looks through your graveyard, sees some key cards, and then marks them with, you know, in different places, so he'll kind of know, you know, about what's happening at any point in the game. But, you know, like, stacking's not relevant, but there are some really relevant ways we're going to talk about tonight that you can cheat and that you need to kind of be paying attention to.
Which you actually just kind of led us well into the next one, which was marking cards. There are different ways, whether you do some kind of marking to your sleeve, or, I mean, if you really want to ruin your investment, you could mark your cards and play them outside of a sleeve, although unless you're playing a really cheap deck, and in Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitively, I wouldn't say there's a cheap deck. I don't know if you'd really want to ruin it, but I mean, there are ways to mark your sleeves. If you use old tabs.
Yeah, which is kind of like the normal way. You know, when people are talking about marking cards, it's not the physical card itself, it's the sleeve, because I can't think of the last time I've ever seen a player sit down and not have sleeves on their cards, except for maybe in sneak previews.
Yeah. I mean, you could have one that's, you could have like one that you're using old tattered sleeves, and so, you know, you put all your power cards in the one that have like some of it peeling off, or you've got a certain mark in a certain spot.
So there are certain ways, like also because different companies, like their white sleeves are a kind of a different shade. You know, maybe one's a little more of a dull white, and so that's a way I've seen people do it. And also different size sleeves. So whenever they grab the deck, you feel whenever they square the deck off in their hand after shuffling, you can feel where the card's at. You know, because it's a different size. And as Genzaki mentioned before the podcast, people trimming the tops of the sleeves. So when the sleeve is squared off and set down, you'll be able to visually see a gap where all the ends aren't the same length.
So, I mean, what would you say are some other ways, or is that your kind of spiel into it?
There are probably lots of ways, and there's probably a lot that, you know, we all know, but we just won't be able to think of right at the moment because we're trying to force ourselves to think of them. But yeah, like definitely be aware of that. You know, the the off-colored sleeves where they're the same color but they're different brands. The different size sleeves, because the different companies, there's no one set standard size. Some are a little wider, some are a little taller.
Like you could have
I know for a fact.
Yeah, you could have like an Ultra Pro and
A player's choice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Also,
to
another
really
good.
mask it.
Oh.
What's that?
No, just continue with what you say.
Oh, I was like, the Dragon Force. I think that's the name of the sleeve. Dragon something. I don't know what it's the actual name. But I'm thinking it's like Dragon Force. But anyway, there's a dragon sleeve that kind of really resembles the player choice. Like if you've ever seen the gold kind of metallic-y player choice sleeve, there's a Dragon Force sleeve that looks pretty similar, and so do a lot of the colors. They have that kind of like plasticky, kind of shiny look to them. And the Dragon Force sleeves are significantly shorter. Like when you put your card in the sleeve, there's very little sleeve above the card, and on a player's choice sleeve, it almost hits perfect. And so that's another, that's an example of using, different sleeves of the same color to kind of mark certain cards. But also, and this is something that's a kind of a precautionary tale too that you mentioned, Ben, which is the damage sleeves. Because sometimes you'll just be sitting at your house sleeving up the deck, and then you start shuffling it, and just from a bad shuffle, maybe an edge of your sleeve gets damaged, or when you're putting a card in, you put it in, maybe a little too forcefully, and it creates a little ridge at the top of the sleeve. Well, be wary of that, guys, when you're going to play in tournaments, because your opponent can use that as saying you're marking your cards, and there's nothing you can do to argue it, because it's a black and white kind of argument. Either they feel you're cheating or you're not. That's kind of like the idea I've gotten about it. So, that's why whenever I go play, I don't only have enough sleeves for my main deck and my side deck, which are the same sleeve, but I also have an extra pack. So throughout the tournament, if I need to switch the entire deck of sleeves because of wear, or a few specific that got damaged from shuffling or anything like that, you always have them. You need to be aware, not just of your cards and how to play the game. Unfortunately, we're in a time in the game now where this stuff is kind of relevant, and people they'll look for wins any way they can. So that's something else, whereas you can use those kind of like damages and creases to put in key cards so when it's on top of your deck. You also need to be aware of that, because that stuff happens accidentally. And so if it's in your deck, make sure it's not in if you're in like a regional or a YCS or a premier event, so you're not getting a game loss. You're not losing a match, and not because of the way you played it, but because of something, trivial like that.
And I mean, there are players that are that petty. I mean,
yes.
People who do make those big investments in their cards because they want to win. Some people will try to rule shark you, which we'll go into that later. That's definitely a way of cheating in the game. But, Keo, King Guy Pie, either of you got any thoughts to add to Mark's card?
There's something maybe not many people notice, but like if you play with your sleeve long enough, there might be some dirt on it, on the back of it. Some people actually use that as a way to mark their card.
So you're talking about maybe dust or...
Yeah. Some dust or black dust, some black dot that many people just look at it and say, oh, this is just an old sleeve and stuff. But some people actually use that to their advantage and mark their card using that way.
Yeah, it can be a smudge or anything, but, at your local level, most of the time you're not going to run into people who are going to make a big deal out of it. There are those few people, and believe me, I've ran into a few at my local levels, and that's just because they went out and spent all that money on the top deck and can't believe they lose to something that's on a budget. But some of them will be petty enough to try to force the rule sharking and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, like Genzo said, you definitely have to pay attention to all aspects of the game, not just how you play, what you play, as far as your cards, but also the kind of condition you keep your protective wear in. Because, yeah, that's definitely a way at a higher tiered event. Some person could actually shark you into a loss. And we know, as I said earlier, Konami's kind of coming down hard on players and banning them from playing and all, that if you get kicked from an event, you could possibly lose your privileges of dueling at tournaments. And it's so stupid because the game was supposed to start out as fun, but that's just my little spiel. King Guy Pie, you got anything to add about marking?
No.
We covered it all. So, the last point we're going to talk about was just cheating in general. And like I said, one of the ways cheating in general, rule sharking, looking for those small spots on a card or a sleeve and say, oh, he marked his cards, or somebody who doesn't take away life points when they should. There are some small mistakes that are skipped over and you just don't realize it. And then again, there are people who will just try to take you for what you're willing to give. And then again, cheating in general, most of it comes back to you and how much attention you're actually paying to the game. I mean, if you're just sitting there like, okay. And I've been in those matches where you're just it seems like you're getting your rear end handed to you. And you're just like, okay. And not even realizing you have a chance to stop it. It does come back, some of it back on you and how much attention you're actually paying. What are your thoughts in, just ways you would think of in general of cheating in the game, guys?
There's many ways to cheat, and it's almost never hit you until someone actually tell you about that. Like there's until the mark correct, like some way of marking, and as well as power shuffling one. It's never got to me until someone actually told me that. So just keep aware out of what might actually happen.
What about you, King Guy Pie?
Like Keo said, there's so many different ways to cheat. And what happens with me the most is people trying to rule shark me. Because they try to take advantage of my age. In real life, they take advantage of my age. They think I don't know these rulings and such.
And that's why if you ever have a question, it's not unheard of to call for a judge. If you think a play is questionable, raise your hand and call judge and have a judge come over and rule it instead of just believing what the other person says. There could be errata to cards, which there has been. There could be new rulings, such as when priority was dropped. There's many different aspects of the game where a player could try to shark you and say, well, this isn't how this plays out, like the chain links and all. They could try to boggle your mind. If you're ever in doubt, call a judge. What about you, Genzo? What's your thoughts?
Well, that's an important bit of information you just dropped off right there, which is the judges are there for a reason, So whether you be an experienced player with years and years in the game behind you, or you're one of the newer players, if you're not feeling comfortable about anything, about a sequence of plays, or about a chain and the way it's being resolved and how you can actually affect it, or just anything like that, if you feel that your opponent's stacking you, quote unquote, if you feel your opponent is doing anything shady, the judge, just raise your hand up. The game does not continue once you say, hold on, judge. Your opponent just has to sit there and wait it out as well. But yeah, there are plenty of ways to cheat, and wow, there's so many. some common ones, life points. I see a lot of calculator work, especially since some of these tools have been, travel.
Nope. I think he dropped for a second.
Yep.
Well, I think what he's going into is like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Dual Calculator. That's one that I've seen. And that's why, like, when I go to a tournament, I leave my iPhone out. So my opponent, and it has one for each side. My opponent can see everything that I do. Because that's another place where a person could shark you and say, well, you didn't take away enough life points. So, I'll punch in the numbers on there, and I'll say, this is what I got me, this is what I got you. This what you got? Just so that you clarify each step of it whenever you do any kind of damage. Because there are, like I said, there are those players who will look for any way to shark you possible. Whether it be not deducting their own life points, saying they did more damage to you than they actually did, not paying life points for a cost, and then it comes back later to bite you in the game. Definitely keep a good eye on your life point calculations. Yes, I have gotten good at this, but anyways, other ways to cheat, always make sure, I would say, when your opponent is shuffling their decks, make sure that they're not, like, shuffling them sideways. That's a common way I've seen some people cheat, was to shuffle their deck sideways, so they're kind of getting a look at how they're shuffling their cards in, and that goes back into the stack. That's why whenever I shuffle from the side with my cards facing down, and then I split them, because you can run into those people. Oh, well, he's stacking his deck because he's shuffling on the side. That's why, like I say, I shuffle mine face down, and then I split them and hand them to my opponent. And Genzo just got back on here with us, so we'll let him finish up. I kind of covered the rest of, like, the dual calculators and about leaving them out for my opponent to see, and every time any kind of damage is done, this is the damage I got, this is the damage you got. Do they match up?
Okay, yeah, so the thing is like there's a big trend because somewhere along the lines having enormous calculators became cool and significant and made you a good player because you had a really big calculator, which is just silly. But what I was saying is basically, and a judge will tell you this himself, the guy with the life points wrote down is the guy who wins the argument. So if you're going to have a big calculator, well, that's cool. Have a big calculator as long as you have a piece of paper there to also keep track of your life points. Because, life point, that's the way the players cheat you, like, especially if you're the kind of guy, there's a lot of duelists who go and play their matches and don't track the life points whatsoever because they see their opponent doing it and they're like, well, hey, he'll do it. Why should I? Always be taking track of your own life points. So if your opponent, if you know for a fact in your head that you have 2,000 more life points than your opponent, but he has you 1,500 less than him, well, if you don't have a way to prove it, well, then you're going to be 1,500 life points under your opponent when the judge makes his decision. So that's one way. Also, be always aware, excuse me, of the other piles of cards, meaning your opponent's banished pile. Make sure that it's kept clearly separate from their graveyard and their deck area, and always be paying attention to where their hand, like players, when they're done with the turn, they may set their hand on the table. Maybe it's next to that banished play, and so, it has been a case where players have, when they're picking their hand up, slid one of those really good banished monsters back into their hand. So be aware of that, like it's kind of unfortunate actually how much you actually have to pay attention to a game now, because like you said, the game may have been started on the principle of fun, but that's definitely not. Fun is probably one of the least relevant words in Yu-Gi-Oh at the moment, because it's become super competitive, where people will, scratch and just tear for any bit of advantage, and they're never willing to give rope. So just make sure that you're paying attention to stuff like that. Another one, at the start of the game when your opponent sits down, there's people can palm cards. Some people will pull their deck out of their deck box and have a few good cards on top, and then somewhere in the pulling them out and starting to shuffle, a few cards will wind up on their knee, and then they'll draw X amount of cards and close them up real quick in their fists, and then at some point make a small gesture down to their lap, and voila, they have a really good hand now. There's a lot of ways. So, and it's not fair to actually tell the players that it's always going to be your fault for not paying attention, because there is so much you have to pay attention, in regards to the game now, not just the game and what plays you're making and if you're being smart and actually playing well. But then outside of that, like I had a friend, we went to some regionals. They were back-to-back, Saturday and Sundays. We both topped the Saturday, and then we're like, you know what, we'll go back Sunday. We went Sunday to a different location, and the only thing that stopped him from topping with me that day, so we'd have double tops together as friends, which would have been really cool, is in his final match, he went to go for his extra deck, and it was no longer on the table, because a group of the guy's friends started hovering around the table, and at some point one of them picked up the extra deck and walked off, and he lost because of that. So, there's so much. Again, you can't emphasize that point enough, where it almost seems like too much at some instances. It's just too much. Like, if you're playing at the feature table, that's probably the best table to be playing at in a room. If there's a feature table, because there's generally nothing shady happening there, because there's a guy watching you, at all times. You have your own judge sitting there or whatever. But, also, the guys who sit with multiple mats. I talked to Genzaki about this before the podcast. I've seen this done via video and stuff, where people will put cards in between their mats. And they're just saying, I just like to have all my mats with me. I'm like, really? They give you a table. What more do you need? One mat's not enough? So... and I'm not afraid whatsoever. I'm like, either you're going to show me, or I'm going to call the judge over here, and he's going to flip through your mats. Like, I don't care if you're a good guy who just wants to have all 18 of your mats with you. I don't care. So just being that, pay attention as much as you can. And like I said, if you ever feel that you're being done wrong, the judges are there for a reason.
Definitely. I mean, basically, are there ways to cheat in Yu-Gi-Oh? Of course. But ultimately, whether you take that win or loss, if someone does actually cheat you in the game, all really comes back on you. How much attention are you paying to the game? Are you taking all the steps to prevent cheating? If you're offered a cut, are you taking it? If you think someone's hiding cards, are you mentioning it? If you think someone's sharking you on a rule, are you calling the judge over? If you think someone is not keeping proper track of the life points, were you keeping track of the life points yourself? A lot of these can be avoided if you cover your own bases. Don't always trust your opponent, because there are people who are just there to win. I've watched guys who actually got called out for cheating, and they walked out because they were mad because they got busted. And that's because one player decided, I'm going to question what's going on here. And, they called a judge over, and the judge said, yeah, this guy's right, you're wrong. And this guy had been playing for, let's see, he was playing back when I started back in 04, so he was playing before that, so probably 10 plus years. And he knew what the actual ruling was, but he was trying to shark the guy across from him. And that player called over the judge, and they ruled in the guy who called the judge over in his favor because he was right. And the other duelist got up and walked away because he realized he couldn't shark the guy he thought was new to the game. So, a lot of the cheating, that really comes back on you and how much attention you're paying. We're just trying to give you some tips on some things that can happen and some ways that you can avoid taking a game loss because someone had marked cards or someone sharked you on a rule, tried to go too fast. Remember, when you're doing your steps in any phase, draw phase, standby phase, battle phase, you have to declare everything. So if your opponent's just going, okay, boom, 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 instead of saying, okay, standby phase, you can always tell them to slow down, please state your phases. Because that's another way some players will get it over on you. Well, he got this far into the turn, and now he's saying he wants to activate this. And the judge is going to say, well, did you declare each phase?
Yeah, that's something that players overlook a lot. You know, like, it's probably something you should do, but so many people take the game and how it's played for granted that it just doesn't get done. And that's one of the things that players try to take advantage of on Dueling Network, I found. Like, I've watched games where, you know, like, nobody knows how to click the buttons, the phase buttons. It's pretty funny. Like, the entire game basically gets played in draw phase or battle phase. And I've seen guys want to effect Baylor or Monsters Effect, and the guy will be like, I'm in my draw phase. It says in your main phase. And then, like, I'll chime in the watchers chat, how are you summoning a monster in your draw phase?
Yeah, I've you know, unless I'm playing with friends,
Yeah.
most of the time, I will click through the phases. But there again, that's another area. Make sure that you yourself, because you also don't want someone to shark you and say, oh, well, he's not declared it all through the game. Make sure you're showing this player, I know each phase I'm going into and I know what can happen in this phase. So, you know, as you're playing through your turn, you're giving your opponent a chance to respond so that they can come back and say, oh, well, he just flew through his phases and didn't ask me for a response. And, you know, vice versa. But
Like, I have a friend that I play online, and he does that now out of habit, and it aggravates me. And I'm like, dude, I know you. Like he will not play a game online without hitting every phase, even if he's going to do nothing in the turn. He goes to. I'm like, dude, quit.
so, I mean, yeah, like I said, a lot of cheating, it's a reality. It's just like any other game, but you can prevent it. Pay attention, make sure that you know the rules, know your options, know that you have the option to call a judge, know that you can tell your opponent to slow down and please go through each phase and ask for a response. Know that it's best to keep paper and pen handy so you can show that you're keeping track of the life points. And definitely pay attention to the game, because I ran through games back when I first started playing, when I did always take pen and paper. And I could go back and track through there, like on a solemn judgment, and they're like, well, why do you have this many life points deducted? I go look at your graveyard when you activate a solemn judgment. That's why you lost those life points. So definitely keep track of the game. Don't just kind
And also, like, a quick point we should make, Ben, is, like, we really can't list off, like, you know, the list of every way an opponent can cheat. I mean, because while I won't give credence to some of the ideas that people, you know, say that other duelists use to cheat, there is a long, long laundry list of ways that players will try to eke out advantage, whether it be soft cheating, which is you generally what you call, like, rule sharking, you know, where, like, if your opponent activates something and they know that they can't, and they're just doing it to see if you'll let them, like, that's soft cheating, whether it's something like that or whether it's something, you know, as, you know, involved as palming cards, you know, there are lots of ways. So, like, we really don't want to get through, like, the whole list, because it's probably impossible to do. But, like, you can obviously go on YouTube and just, like, type up, you know, like, search up, like, cheating in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something. I'm sure you'll find dozens of videos that'll have people, you know, giving you ideas whether they're legitimate or not, you know. So there's ways to find out what to do. But also, you know, going back to the paying attention aspect, You know, like, once you think you know every way that people can cheat you, somebody's thinking of a new way.
I mean, there's
So,
people
some-
who throw extra quantities of a card in there. Person who would throw in a second ultimate offering that if you're not paying attention to the game, they just slip that one past you. Maybe the next
Yeah.
person they might not slip it past, but you still took that game loss before they got busted for running 2 ultimate offerings when it's limited to 1. I think, yeah, it's limited.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, pay attention to the game. If you're
As
there,
best you can.
if you're there and you're playing competitively and you want to win, then definitely pay attention. Make sure that you're keeping your eyes peeled and that you're taking precautions to the best of your ability to keep from being cheated. And also make sure that you're not doing anything that someone come back and say that you are cheating yourself.
Indeed.
So, King Dai Pai, Keo, either of you got anything else to add?
Nope. You guys pretty much cover everything.
Yeah, they covered everything.
Well, then I guess that kind of covers it for this week. And since we don't have Eddie to dance us out, we'll just kind of leave it on that note.